All right, all right, all right. Let's get this show on the road. Why is my screen so dark? Why does that look so dark? That's not normal. That's weird. Do I need to turn my screen brightness down? I don't know if that helps or not. I can't tell because it just makes it worse on my end because my screen brightness goes down and then I can't see. Anyway, welcome. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done a stream. It's been warm out, and so I've been occupied with other things. But there was a video that Braxton Hunter, am I getting that right? Yeah, it's Braxton Hunter. I always end up saying it backwards. I always have to make sure I'm saying it the right way. This was about a week or so ago. I watched some of it. I haven't watched all of it. But these are documented and hard to deny miracle healings. So this is going to be interesting. I originally had the stream scheduled for 4 o'clock, and then I set it back 4:30 because Jim Tour and Bill Craig were on Capturing Christianity talking about origins of life, and I wanted to check that out, and I didn't know how long it was going to run. But about halfway through it, I was like, yeah, this is kind of just the two of these guys rambling about stuff they don't know anything about. And then I set it back to 4 o'clock because I was like, well, fuck it. Anyway, so let's jump right into this, shall we? Let's take a look at some miracles and see if they can convince us.
For having me, Braxton. I really appreciate it.
What do people need to know about you as far? We'll put whatever links you want in the description. So, but what would you want to say to point people towards your stuff, or whatever you want to say about yourself too, you feel free.
Yeah, so I am just kind of a a Christian who likes to learn things and write. I wish I had something more interesting to say to that, but I over the past several years have just kind of really gotten to theology and apologetics, probably about 5 years ago now, and that just really inspired me to kind of write my own stuff and do my own stuff and kind of fill in the gaps where
I'm gonna make sure I mute myself before I start talking. The one thing I will say is that had I not initially gotten interested in Christian apologetics and Christian philosophy, I don't know if I would be interested in the things that I'm interested in now. So one thing I will say is, because there's actually a lot of people in the realm of atheology that used to be Christian and were either training to be ministers or were doing apologetics or something like that. So I think that there's at least some sense in which that can be sort of a start to getting people into the philosophy and the theology and even the science a bit. And then what I think ends up happening, at least to some people, is that once you really start to examine the philosophy and everything much more deeply, you kind of start to see the glaring issues with theism of a variety of sorts. And then that's what moves people into more of like an atheological framework with respect to how they approach philosophy and science and theology, like myself, rather than sticking with, the apologetics. So there are many who are involved in apologetics.
I thought there may need to be more intermediate work and so forth. So I've written intermediate to pop level books on the resurrection. I've written a pop level book on theodicy. And it kind of gets into the topic we're talking about now, but Miracles is the book that I've been working on since close to 3 years now. And unlike the other two, this one's I'm expecting to be pretty academic, pretty scholarly.
Make sure I'm unmuted. I gotta be honest with y'all. I don't know how you spend 3 years studying something like Miracles. Do you really want to know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like somebody coming up to me and saying, yeah, I've spent 3 years studying Bigfoot and I'm convinced he exists. I'm sorry, but I mean, that's just what that sounds like to me. Like, why would you spend 3 years studying miracles? And how, if you spent that much time looking at this, how is it that like you still believe that miracles, like it blows my mind. But I'm working from a different perspective than a lot of other people.
Close to 500 pages or so as it is. So I'm really excited for that book. Wow. And for how that comes out. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I really wanted to write a book that I think dealt with the topic not only thoroughly, but had enough cases, because there are lots of really good academic materials out there and pop level stuff that deals with philosophical arguments like for miracles, like dealing with David Hume and so forth. In fact, that's the majority. If you look up arguments for God's existence in like Phil papers, at the very bottom, I think it's the last or like second to last is the argument for miracles. Like if you compare to the Kalam or the teleological argument or even Pascal's wager, it has much less published on it. And even most of those are just philosophical arguments of can testimony be enough to verify a miracle. There's comparatively very little written in terms of actually documenting cases. There are some exceptions to this, like Craig Keener is very famous for having his giant.
One of the reasons for that is going to be that before you can consider any case some sort of documented case of a miracle, you're going to have to outline what a miracle is and in virtue of what any claimed instance of a miracle is, in fact, a miracle. And I have to be honest, they're talking about like the metaphysics of a miracle, what they are, what defines one, how we can know that something is a miracle versus not one. I think that this is just a very ill-defined area, and I think that that's because the concept of miracles is ill-defined. Well, maybe not so much that the concept is ill-defined. I guess it might sound a bit strong, but just that miracles are kind of a ridiculous notion. Like, what distinguishes them from magic?
Tome on miracles that he published back in around 2011. But I think with Keener's work, although it is certainly a trailblazer and certainly a very great work to start it off, I found it a little bit disappointing in that I think it deals more with the quantity of cases and not so much the quality. And so I wanted to kind of take that and make it where we're looking at specific cases, going to the depths and looking at that. So there are other people out there like GMRI, the Global Medical Research Institute, Kenny Gunther Brown, Josh Brown, who have been publishing good works on this, whether it's in medical journals or books by Harvard University Press that do document some of these. And I kind of wanted to go off of that as well. But I think that I wanted to take the philosophical arguments and combine them with the case studies and make a robust work, and not just, one or the other, as a lot of other works have done. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do as of recent. But yeah.
Well,
so
what I love about miracles, Caleb, is, and I've got another podcast, Supernatural Stories, where I try to listen to what just normal people, everyday people who've had experiences or believe they've had experiences, and let them talk. But this is gripping to the everyday person, believer or non-believer, I think, in a way that perhaps some of the more philosophical apologetic stuff that's more rigorous, syllogisms and things like, not that you haven't formulated miracle stuff into those same sorts of arguments, but to the average person, if you put up the kalam and explain it, well, a percentage of that audience is going to be really excited by that and may want to get into apologetics. But with miracles, if you show them some pictures or show them a video or put someone up there to talk about it, this just, and it's like Michael Icona said when he was on our show some time back. He said, if you've experienced something that classically would have been described as supernatural, then you just know then. And it's so it's very, very interesting and powerful, and I love it. And so I can't wait to get to this presentation that you're going to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point, Braxton, because most people in the world don't believe in God because they've read the Kalam cosmological argument or the contingency argument. There are some out there who are more analytic people, but if God was as accessible to that, as they've read, because most people in the world don't believe in God because they've read the Kalam cosmological argument or the contingency argument. There are some out there who are more analytic people, but if God was as accessible to that,
I think that's entirely true. Most people don't believe in God. You could isolate any one argument that exists, whether in natural theology or any other form of theology or apologetics, whether it's Christian, whether it's Muslim, doesn't matter. I'm not going to say nobody, but at any rate, very, very few people believe in their religion because of those arguments. The vast majority of people who already believe and use the arguments as a means of sort of bolstering their belief. And that's not necessarily a wrong thing to do, but it isn't in virtue of those arguments, whether individually or taken as a cumulative case, that people believe in God. It's that these arguments are sort of a way of bolstering the religion that they already hold to. And this is why you see both Christians and Muslims using something like, say, the Kalam cosmological argument or contingency arguments,
where you would have to become a PhD or be very well read in contemporary cosmology to really be justified in believing his existence. I think that would be a horrible catalyst for like divine hiddenness. It would make it far worse if that's the only way you could be justified. So I think there's appeal to people like Alvin Plantinga when they talk about reformed epistemology and religious experience, right? That the intuition that we kind of know God exists. And that parlays to supernatural encounters where people say, I had an experience with God. Sometimes they mean I felt the Holy Spirit, and it's a bit more, abstract. And sometimes they mean I saw a person healed. I saw an answer to prayer. And I think that's the reason why most people believe. And I don't think that's even like contentious, right?
Well, let me ask you right here, Caleb.
Yeah.
That second category that it seems to have some sort of sensory involvement or whatever. Have you ever personally experienced, I think most Christians haven't, they've experienced this sort of awareness of the presence of God and those sorts of things. But have you ever experienced anything that would have classically been termed as a supernatural event in your life?
I would actually say no, which people are surprised when I say that because the topic I'm looking into, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, the most I've had is like, hearing a worship song at.
He said no. Yeah, this is obviously somebody who accepts miracles, like he just said. I say no, but that's strange given, what I'm currently studying. And I just paused because now I'm interested to hear how Caleb is going to define miracles. Because if he doesn't think that they're supernatural, I'm very interested here. When I was skimming through this, I didn't catch this part. So,
conference or something and feeling this like absolute sense of joy or peace. Like I felt that, but nothing that I would say that I couldn't rule out as psychological if I wanted to, right? Nothing that I could like for sure find like I know that was God and I know it wasn't just myself.
Right.
Wanting something to be true. So yeah, in that way I have not. I do however have friends who have claimed that. I have friends who claim that they've had literal like waking visual visions of Jesus appearing before them. I'm not here to validate or invalidate that. I don't think it's my position to say whether or not God did or did not do that. But I am both I'm both envious of that and I'm also both humbled by that, because I think that, and I don't want to go off too much there, but I think that one reason why, not everyone has access to miracles, right? The reason why it doesn't perform to everybody is because, among many reasons, we all have diversity of testimonies, and that itself is a good thing. But we also have to really trust people, because the fact that we don't always experience these ourselves and we have to take someone's word at it, I think allows us to humble ourselves. And so when you look at something like the New Testament, where, the women are the first ones to see the resurrected Jesus, and that was in that culture, that would have been very scandalous, because the testimony of women was typically not accepted the same rate as men's were, generally speaking. And you can even see that with people like David Hume, who criticized miracles, where they were saying, oh, these are only reported in, ignorant and barbarous nations. Now, that's not PC by today's standards. You couldn't get away with saying that, because Hume was basically implying non-white countries. He was an 18th century Englishman who was pro-slavery. We don't have to sugarcoat it. That's basically what he was implying. But even though that obviously isn't true, I
mean, I don't disagree with him being like a pro-slavery individual and all that, but I feel like that might be reading a little bit more into what the point of what Hume's argument was than one would need to. I don't know if we can really say that about Hume.
do think that people have unintentional prejudices, where people who see or report miracles are thought of as like credulous or superstitious, and not, we enlightened Westerners are too good for this, and this is something that only the silly rural farmers or people in third world countries still believe in, which is just statistically not true. I think that there have been polls that say something around the lines of like 1 in 3 Americans believes they've seen a miracle. There was even a 2004 study of American doctors. We're talking about like medical professionals in America. 75% of them believed miracles still happened, and 55% of them, over half of them, said that they have witnessed a healing that they thought was miraculous.
Hey guys, did you know that the majority of doctors in a vastly majority Christian nation, back at a time where Christianity was significantly higher amongst its population, that a majority of these doctors believed in basic things that almost every Christian would also believe in? Did you guys know that?
But defined as something they didn't think they could explain naturally, following prayer. So that's a lot of witnesses. That's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Now, I'm not here to say that those are all legitimate. I think most of them probably are not like genuinely inexplicable, but that's still hundreds of thousands of cases and hundreds of millions if you're counting literally everyone on earth who reports these. And I'm saying even if 98% of those are not credible, that still leaves you with several thousand that we shouldn't just hand wave away. So I do think that these are something that needs to be taken seriously, and that's something that is starting to be discussed more in the contemporary literature. As I said, books published by Harvard and Oxford that deal with this question. So I'm really excited to see where this goes in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Did you say that was a 2002 study?
2004 study.
2004 study says 55% of medical doctors.
I just want to say that the fact that you're seeing recent work by people defending miracles doesn't mean that like more people are looking into this. I feel comfortable saying that like most people working in, say, like, analytic metaphysics don't care about miracles. They don't care about miracles. That's not a thing that they care about. I don't think most philosophers care about miracles either, because I don't think, well, it's not just that I don't think. The 2020 Phil survey shows us that most philosophers are not theists. So you know, I doubt that one would see, like, maybe within philosophy of religion there is a rising, or within like specifically Christian philosophy or Christian metaphysics, you might find a rise in the work that's being published on miracles and things of that nature. But I don't think that you're going to see that broadly in philosophy.
Doctors? Is that just
American
medical doctors
doctors.
across the board? Okay.
I believe they've seen a miracle. Yes.
How 55%?
Believe that they've witnessed a miracle. 75% believe that they still happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an impressive number on its own. But the 55% that claim they've seen one or think they've seen one, that is incredible. All right. So should we move into the presentation time then?
Yeah, we can. I don't like the word presentation because it wasn't something overly formal. I just have like brief criteria and like a few cases, and we can kind of see where we go from there. But yeah, we can get into that if you like.
I love your humility, and you were talking about humility, but I appreciate your humility that you're saying, look, I'm not saying that I'm some sort of an expert, but you know, you have put together some facts that we still have to deal with, whether you're an expert or not, right? So let's move in here. All right. So unfortunately, we are hindered by the fact that we are not SpaceX.
These aren't just an argument from miracles. It's an argument from Christian miracles. Wonder how we established that one.
And we have limited technology. And so I have to advance the slides for Caleb. So you just tell me when, Caleb, but is it okay if I stop and ask you questions?
Oh, absolutely. I would prefer you do that, actually.
Okay.
All right. The only thing I'm looking at now is I tried to get the color palette to match your general background, the green and teal, and I think I did a good job. I could use more green though. But
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I like it. Yeah. Thank you for that.
I could have done that more. Yeah. So you can go to the first. Go ahead.
Yeah. And before we do, I should say, if I haven't said this anywhere previously in the video, my understanding is that one of the slide, well, I know because I've seen the slide presentation, and there is, toward the end of this presentation, particularly, there's a couple of graphic images, not sexually graphic, but in terms of like
violent,
you know, difficult to look at violent situations. And so, or gory, I guess, type situations. So just know that. And you've got some time to get there because we're gonna take.
And I'll sign off before we get to that slide. It has.
Oh, that's nice. So thank you.
It won't jump scare. It won't be a surprise. So
all right, mostly PG-13 presentation here. All right.
Yeah. Right. So so when I think the first thing is a miracle is already fairly difficult to define. And I don't want to get into the whole ontology of it because people debate whether a miracle is God simply intervening, or God has to intervene in a way that's contrary to laws of nature. You know, is God always intervening in nature and only does it differently? There's a lot of debates when it comes to the ontology of that. But I think we can say that a miracle is something that typically happens, that could only happen with supernatural intervention in that kind of way. So the question is, how do we typically get from a weird anomalous event
that seems to be in tension? That seems to be in tension with his previous claim that he doesn't believe that he's ever observed or witnessed anything supernatural. I mean, and maybe he considers miracles to be something supernatural, and he just thinks that he himself has not observed anything like that, but that people have. So
that we don't know the cause of, to saying that it's a miracle, right? Because there are things that are inexplicable that I don't think we would necessarily say is miraculous. Now, colloquially, people said that at the time. You have, when the Mets won the World Series in I think it was 1969, 1960s, they were called the Miracle Mets, right? And so people, I think, overuse the word miracle when it's just anything that's extraordinary. And miracles are extraordinary, but it's not something that's just simply unlikely. It needs to be something that's actually like impossible, sans divine intervention. So
are you saying that when my wife said, when she gave...
Okay, Braxton's probably just going to do a joke there. I just want to clarify, and I think that if Caleb were listening, he'd probably agree with this. When he says impossible, he doesn't mean logically impossible. He's saying something like that the event in question is nomically impossible. That is, that it's some sort of violation of the laws of nature or the laws of physics. And had the natural world been left to its own devices, such an event would not occur in any possible world, all things considered. Or not all things considered, all things being equal. So you would need something like God to intervene into the natural world to make these events happen. And that is what we would call a miracle. So, I mean, That's sort of how I would characterize what it is that Caleb is saying. And if it's correct, I would agree with that.
Gave birth. This was a miracle. That my wife was wrong.
Well, unfortunately, I think that your wife and many like her and us as people sometimes overuse the word, right, to describe something. With the childbirth, as amazing as life is something that's fairly common, right? It's not something that only happens, under certain circumstances. It's a fairly regular event. So I think we just need to be more careful with how we're using the phrase there. But
Yeah,
so
you're right. It's the colloquial definition of this is unbelievably amazing and a blessing and all that.
Absolutely, yeah. And so most miracle claims, a lot of people think of like, walking on water, calling down fire from heaven, turning water into wine. And those would certainly all be miracles Jesus performed. But most miracles, at around almost 98% or more of them, are typically miracles that involve healing in some way, usually ailments from a disease. And of course, this is the majority of things that Jesus did as well. So, but how do we know that? How do we separate, someone getting better from spontaneous remission or the placebo effect or medicine or just some anomalous recovery to an actual like miraculous recovery? And these are good questions. And this is something that's been discussed for literally centuries. The form.
Yeah, I do have to say that at least Caleb is trying to, I would presume, do something to bridge that gap between what makes something go from just some merely unexplained phenomena to it is a miracle. How do we make that jump? What sort of and I think that's what this list is. He should have criteria there because that would be the plural, and I see 7 different things there. But it sounds to me like this Lambertini criteria are the criteria for defining a medical miracle that make it such that it's not just some otherwise merely unexplained, potentially spontaneous event. That is at least my presumption here. And I mean, I have to say I applaud him for trying to make that jump, because when you're talking about like the metaphysics of these kinds of events, these are the kinds of jumps, these are the kinds of things that need to be explicated before metaphysicians are going to take these kinds of things seriously. Now, I'm sure there are probably issues with his case, as this stream is probably going to reveal, but it's good that people are making these attempts. That's what needs to be done, and you don't see it done very often.
Formal term is the Lambertini criterion, and this was actually named after a pope back in the 18th century, mid 1700s, who came up with these criteria for approving of saints. Now, I won't go into the whole process here, but short version is that the Catholic Church has a whole process for affirming saints once they die, whether a person's a saint, and they typically have to have 2 miracles. It used to be 4, it dropped to 2 in the 1980s. And so when they were establishing this criteria, Pope Benedict the 14th said, okay, these are going to be the criteria we're going to use. So this is a modernized version of that. So this is my kind of like reinterpretation of those criteria. But one is that we have a disease that's medically documented, both the diagnosis and the recovery. So, if a woman comes up and let's say she goes to a faith healing conference and she's prayed over and she says, oh, God, I had a tumor that went away and God healed me of breast cancer. And we go and we do an x-ray and she doesn't have cancer. That's great. But the thing is, if it's the case that she never actually was diagnosed with it, or she didn't formally, like maybe she saw a growth and assumed that it was breast cancer, which does happen, we couldn't verify that. We wouldn't be able to count that because, we had to make sure that the diagnosis was right. And sometimes people in good faith error sometimes think that they're sick when they're not, or think that they're cured when they're not. So we need to make sure that we're getting verifications for both of these. And that alone is pretty hard. Bethel Church, which is very known for healings, often doesn't even, they said that they don't bother to follow up on people because it's too much effort, and they have faith, that God heals them. They don't think they need to check. And I think that we should certainly have faith and confidence, but the danger is that people think that they're healed when they're not. And there are unfortunately very tragic cases where people have, for example, been prayed for, thought they were healed of seizures and epilepsy, so they threw out
that for sure.
Absolutely. So the last thing I want with this kind of presentation of this book is I don't want people to be advocating for prayer alone. I think prayer should be, so we should not be forgoing medical care as if it's a lack of faith. Prayer is only for when medical care, it's either medical care is always important. But that's the first criteria. It needs to be medically documented. Second one is that this needs to be an illness that's organic and not psychosomatic. Now, this is important because oftentimes we can get diseases like paralysis or blindness or deafness where people think and show symptoms, strangely enough, to where they're paralyzed, they can't move their arm. And yet when you look at them, there's nothing objectively wrong with them. Their nerves are not damaged. There's nothing there that should be causing this. But because of stress, because of the mind, it can actually cause us to think that we're paralyzed or blind or whatever.
Wow.
So as strange as that is, and there are actually really weird cases you can read of to where with mass hysteria, like there was one case where a school, one girl got a seizure and then a bunch of her classmates started getting seizures and you ended up getting 20 or 30 kids. Now, obviously seizures are not contagious, right? Like you can't get it from someone. So, and when they did neurological examinations, there was nothing wrong with these kids, like nothing wrong with their brain. So the body can do a lot of weird things and it can make you feel like you're sick when you're not. So we need to make sure that that's not the case. And we need to make sure that there's something.
Okay, let me ask all of you in chat. Do we want to sit here and listen to him explain these for the next 10 minutes, or do we just want to move on to the presentation? I'm kind of cool with whatever, but like I can see what the criteria here are. I can kind of figure out for myself like what they mean, but I don't want to just move ahead if like everybody's interested in actually hearing him explain these criteria out more. I'm not going to go through making a poll because I'm in StreamYard and I don't know how to do that. But I'll just keep progressively checking the comments and seeing if there's anybody responding to what I'm asking. One person has responded.
An ailment. So yeah, I will, if someone dies of some other cause that like absurdly, but it's not from the disease, yeah, they opposite. So okay, healings are usually gradual, fine, has to be instantaneous. Healings usually happen with medicine, fine, has to be spontaneous. So that's kind of how we're coming to these. So that's how they've been doing it for the last couple hundred years, and that's kind of the standards I'm trying to use in this work to get the best one. So most of the cases I have are either 6 or 7 of these criteria. There's a couple where it's 1 or 2 or a little bit, I'm not sure. But if it's 5 or less, I typically try not to include it.
The only thing I wanted to say about his criterion, and there's some people that said that they're listening and not reading. So let me just read what his 7 criteria are. I don't know if he read them all already, but I'm going to do it again anyway. 1, the diagnosis and healing were both medically documented. 2, the illness was organic and not psychosomatic. 3, the illness was progressive and showed no improvement prior to the healing. 4, the healing was permanent and not temporary. 5, the healing was instantaneous and not gradual. 6, the healing was complete and not merely partial. And 7, the healing was spontaneous and not attributable to treatment. Now, the first one, the second one, and the third one are all ones I am more than willing to grant. The fourth one, the healing was permanent and not temporary, I think it's one that, depending on what it is that we're talking about, may not be determinable immediately. That may be something determinable months or potentially years down the road. I think the same is also true potentially with number 6, because I think that with a lot of things, I mean, it really does, it is, I would agree with this. I think it is quite rigorous. Though I do think that there are some, and I'm not, what I'm saying isn't meant to like show that these criteria are bad, but just to show that there are some instances that there's a nuance here. Because with many, many different types of diseases, disorders, and ailments, you know, treatment and whether or not somebody has been completely treated, you know, it has fully recovered, are not determinable for years down the road. And so now that might be something that can be absorbed by these criteria, and that's fine. I'm just pointing these things out. The number 7 though, I think is interesting, because I'm wondering in what instance where treatment is applied, and then so imagine that all 6 of these criteria are met in some instance. The person has like stage 4 terminal cancer. This has been medically diagnosed. It's been documented. It's progressive. There's no improvement. And then it's gone. And, you know, like, I don't know, 4 years down the road, they figure out, it's gone permanently. It's not going to come back. How do we know that any treatment that the person may have been taking at the time wasn't responsible for that? This is the thing, is that in any instance where somebody is undergoing some level of treatment for something and then they're healed, how are you going to rule out that it was the treatment? And not just rule out that it was the treatment, because that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a miracle. How do you rule in that it was nothing natural or physical at all? And so while I do think this is quite a robust set of criteria, while I do think that it is meaningful and useful, I do think that there are still some questions that can be asked about some of them. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling and we'll continue this.
Oh, okay. Okay. So as long as so maybe 5 is like a minimum for you. I gotcha.
Yeah, we can go on to some of the actual cases to give examples of these. So first one is Dolores Winder. Some people like Sid Roth have called this the greatest miracle of the 20th century. This is an older picture of her, but this miracle happened when she was in her early 30s. We can go to the next slide if you want. So Dolores had a very profound case of osteoporosis, right? Which a lot of people know is a disease that causes your bones to become more brittle. At the age of 31, she'd had the bones of a 70-year-old woman. So this caused a lot of pain, and it caused her vertebrae to pop out and to actually deteriorate. So the back of her neck and spine would actually break apart. And so she'd had to have several surgeries, which are lumbar infusions, which they basically go and take the bone grafts from your leg and tibia and have to use that bone to mend the bone back in your spine and neck. And they did this on 4 different occasions. Every time it would temporarily work, but it would come undone. It would break apart again. And so this is, as you can imagine, extremely painful and not a good experience. So I have here an X-ray of hers. It's a myelogram from January 15th of 1975. This was later on in the progress of it. And granted, because it's in the 70s, the quality is not the best. But that's an example where we can see, okay, there's an X-ray. There's an organic, objective, stuff wrong here. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide if you want. So she had this for...
Yeah, I've Googled the name Dolores Winder. I can find literally nothing but stuff for selling books on this supposed greatest miracle. A lot of stuff from Christian places. I am finding there's not even a Wikipedia page on this. So there's literally nothing. So I don't know how anybody confirms any of this. I mean, unless somebody's looking up medical records, and sure, that's fine. But I mean, I'm not probably going to agree with some of the things said about any potential healing that she had until I can see them, because I can find absolutely nothing about this other than a bunch of stuff to sell books. She must have been an author or something like that. Anyway, let's continue.
I think around 15 years ago, so a disease that progressively got worse. The pain got so bad, in fact, that she actually had to have 2 cordotomies. And a cordotomy is a procedure that's not even hardly, I don't think it's practiced, or at least it's very rare if it is. You have to have 3 doctors sign off on this. It's usually a condition that's...
And another thing I wanted to point out that I think is kind of unfortunate on Caleb's part is he hasn't put any source material for where he's getting any of this information from. Now, I don't know if he's just pulling it from her books that she may have written about what she did. I don't know what sources she cites, but just Google Dolores Winder. There's nothing. There's actually nothing. I have no idea. I have never heard of this. This must not be something super popular. Yeah.
It's only used for terminal patients. So typically only if you're dying of cancer or some kind of terminal illness. And it was only used prior to modern opioids and pain medications. But basically they go in and they burn the nerves of a certain part of the body so that you can literally feel nothing. You're completely numb, just to relieve you of the pain. And again, this is supposed to be for terminal patients. So just while they're in hospice care. So
the problem with NDEs, near-death experiences, is that we've reproduced them in a number of instances through a variety of different chemicals, and psychoactive drugs and things of that nature. NDEs are thoroughly physical. So are OBEs, of body experiences. I've actually got quite a robust amount of literature on this. So I don't think NDEs are much more convincing than miracles at all, if really at all.
So they're not in so much pain. So because she was it was so bad, she got one cordotomy on her. Which one? I'm trying to remember the sides of it. Okay, on the left side she had.
We'll find out. If I had the money, I would pay you like $20 if this presentation did. He doesn't like to call it a presentation. If it did bring this up, but I've heard that too. I can't remember. Oh, I think I heard it from Sal. Did I hear it from Sal? I know Sal's big on the miracles. But yeah, I don't know if I heard something similar from him, or maybe it was like praise or somebody. I don't know.
Had it it left her numb from the neck down, no feeling on her left side, and on the right side she had to get another one a few years later that left her from the waist down on her right side. So she's completely numb on the left and right side, and this is not reversible because nerve damage in that way it can't be reversed because it affected the nerves of that. So you have this woman who is in extreme pain, her spine's in pain, so she's not in a good situation. She's at this point in her late 30s, early 40s. So we can move on to the next slide if you want.
But real quick, so left her with partial paralysis from the neck down. So she's in a wheelchair now.
Not necessarily. So she actually would have to. She couldn't lift her feet up. She had to shuffle her feet and like lean against things. She can still partially move. She just can't move it up. But she did have to wear a body pad.
The problem is that they have numbed all those nerves, so she can't feel.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
So she can't feel. So she can still move it, but she can't feel anything. So that's why she can't really lift her feet up. So this picture here, she had a big plaster body cast. She was wearing this since 1961, 1962. So pretty early on. So she'd have to wear this because she had severe scoliosis there essentially. So this again got worse. Her again in her neck, which in that way again, she's I think in her like 40s at this point. She really can only. She's in bed almost all day. She can only get out of bed about 3 times a day, and when you feel
had a like I'll go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a very dire situation. By the move, fortunately, we're not say continuationist. She didn't really believe miracles. She was way. I don't think it's in a different context, and so she feels pain in her legs, which is weird because she's like, I shouldn't even be able to feel anything in my legs. Like, why is it like almost like my legs are burning? So she gets up and starts walking around. She steps out of the auditorium, and another doctor follows her out who was attending there from Johns Hopkins University. And he's like, oh, what's wrong?
Again, no source material anywhere on the slides. Nothing. This is for me literally just going in one ear and out the other. I have no idea how you confirm any of this is actually true. If anybody out there can find like something on this that's like actually meaningful, that would be great. But thus far, I am not impressed.
Wrong. And she's like, I feel this weird feeling in my legs. And she had thought that it was actually one of her vertebrae. I forgot to mention this in the other slide, but because her spine kept popping out, she actually had a slight wound on the back of her neck where one of the vertebrae was puncturing out and was very uncomfortable. She thought that she may have pressed it against something. That's why her legs were hurting. So the doctor comes out. I think God's healed you. I think you need to trust me on this. And so after some coaching on this, feels we're hurting. So the doctor comes out and he's looking at her. He's like, she's like, I don't know what's going on. This feels really weird. And he's like, I think God's healed you. I think you need to trust me on this. And so after some coaxing, he eventually gets her to take the body cast off. And so they take her back inside and she's on stage and they're explaining to her like, oh, Miss Coleman, this woman has regained this ability. She's had 2 cordotomies and this, and she feels no more pain. And so she gets up there and she lifts her feet up on the stage the first time. Because remember, she was shuffling before this, and she can finally, walk and move, and she no longer feels pain. And she takes the body cast off. She takes the neck brace off. Now, if I was watching them,
my first question is, if this is a thing that happened on a stage in front of a bunch of people, how is there not even a Wikipedia page on this? Like, I don't even know what to say about this. I really don't. This is just kind of bad. Like, yeah, what?
On a stage, I might think, okay, this could be adrenaline. Someone in the moment could feel healed, but was this an actual healing? Well, 3 or 4 days later, on September 3rd, she goes back to her doctor, who, first of all, is amazed that she's walking with no body cast, perfectly as far as he can tell, in good health. And he's like, Dolores, what happened? And so she excitedly tells her, it's like, I want you to examine me. So she gets on the table, and he runs his hands down her spine, and he sees that her spine is no longer broken, like the bones are together, including the wound that was open, was scarred over now, that had the vertebrae sticking out of it. Her spine is so straight now that she can't even fit in the body cast.
I do have to be honest with everybody here. This is the one thing that you need to understand about these kinds of stories. Like, really think about this for a second. If something like this happened, you don't think this would be highly documented? You don't think this would have become a major thing in the medical industry? Why is there nothing out there about this? Doctors are just going to ignore this stuff? Like that, it makes no sense. It really doesn't make any sense when people present instances like this, but then you can't find anything on it. Why was there not a stir about something that's supposedly a miracle? Why was nobody up in arms over this? Why? Why is there not more buzz about something like this? Why is there no record of that buzz about the thing that is this? It just doesn't make sense.
Her scoliosis is gone.
And the thing is, I bet if somebody could find the actual information on this case, we would find a lot of information that's probably not being presented here.
In that way. And he takes a little needle and does a pinprick on her hands and legs, and she moves back, and so her feeling had come back into her legs and hands.
That's exactly the thing, Amy. And like, you type her name in, Dolores Winder, on Google, there's no Wikipedia page. I even typed in Dolores Winder Wikipedia. There's no Wikipedia page. Nothing. There's just surprised by healing, one of the greatest healing miracles of the 21st century, that Dolores Winder herself wrote. So yeah, I mean, there isn't anything out there.
Hands from the cordotomy, and so he was
now,
astounded by this.
They what did they do? Didn't they, like, what did they cauterize or something? All those nerves?
Yeah, they went and they literally burned the nerves and nerve endings. So that
it shouldn't. This shouldn't even be probably possible, right?
It isn't. No. And from what I've been able to tell, both the source I've gotten from this.
Well, it sounds like they cauterized, they cut and then cauterized the end of nerves. Cauterized, I believe there are documented cases of cauterized nerves and cauterized veins reconnecting. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's a thing that can and has happened. So I wouldn't dare say that it's impossible.
And from my own research, I have not, to my knowledge, and anyone's willing to correct me on this if I want, I'm not aware of any case of a cordotomy being reversed. They've done and granted, there's not many follow-up studies because most people who get them don't live long because they're terminal patients, but they've done 5-10 years follow-ups, and the person sometimes has better quality of life, but they still don't have sensation. They can't feel heat or cold. They can't get arousal and stuff like that. So she had nearly full feeling come back to her body, which again shouldn't be medically possible. And so this was back in 1975. She lived up until 2016 with no relapses. And again, osteoporosis is a disease that gets worse over time, right? And she was in her 30s when this was like at its 30s, 40s when it was at its worst. Even as an old lady, never had any issues, never had to wear the back brace again, never had to have pain medications. To be an implementation that, crosses off a lot of those good criteria. Stuff like that doesn't happen. And when you give an example, they say, okay, fine, it does happen, but we don't have a good explanation. You can't say God's an explanation. It'll usually shift to that, right? So it's like when sometimes young Earth creationists will say there's no good transitional fossils. Then you'll give them a few examples, like, well, those.
Okay, I think that wraps up that particular instance. Yeah, I'm assuming that all the information he got on that comes from the book that she herself wrote. Like, to even think that this has any level of credibility to begin with, I think is just not the right starting point at all. Let's see what TB and major skin disorder is.
It's more interesting. So this one is a little bit older, but I don't think it's an issue because the condition we're dealing with is not something that needs modern medical equipment to diagnose, right? So this was a French miracle, and it's Mary Lemachon, but I believe it's, if I'm going to pronounce it right in French, it's Marie Lemachon.
Why did I keep
I
what am I doing?
apologize if I'm butchering that for
That
any
sounded
viewers
impressive to
and
this
share.
to these Southern American ears.
Yeah. So to give it a little bit of a background, this is a Catholic context. Lourdes is a very famous shrine in Catholic theology because in 1858 there was a young girl who's pictured on the right named Bernadette Soubirous, who claimed that the Virgin Mary appeared to her. I think it was about 28 times. I forget how many. And she would have these conversations, and the Virgin Mary allegedly showed her this spring water that would come. And so people would start coming to this water and would report being healed. And these got so common that they actually had a medical bureau set up to investigate these. And so since 1858, they've had 70 official miracle claims. Now, that's actually not that many compared to literally thousands of people who go there every year, right? So they're really strict. They're applying these same criteria that we talked about earlier. And so with those, they get 70 solid ones, but there's about 2,500 of them that maybe don't get all 7, but they get 5 or 6 that are still considered really remarkable.
But like you say,
So
this is a high trafficked pilgrimage
Yes.
site.
Right, exactly. And so the point is, like, not all of these there are some of them that they affirm as miracles that I don't think they should have, that I'm not persuaded by, and there's some that they didn't that I think they should have. So it's hard to measure that. But Lourdes has cases spanning all the way from the most famous one was of a case.
Sorry, I
No,
went
you're
too
good.
quick for you.
No, you're good. I didn't. Yeah, I should have clarified that. Like, there's a couple famous cases. Like, there's one of a man who allegedly had a bone. He broke his leg, and he literally had the bone sticking out. And when he went to Lourdes, the bone allegedly went back in. The skin covered up in a few seconds, like that. And people would dispute that, and that gets into a really long, complicated thing. But you have cases like that. You have cases of paraplegics, like people who were war veterans who were shot in the head, who were like on permanent disability in wheelchairs, instantly get better. You have people who were blind, deaf, and paralyzed regain it all. So you have really remarkable cases like that. And this is one of the ones, I think it's one of the more well-known ones of Lourdes for a couple of reasons. But this is a Maui, so we can go to the next slide. So as I said, you don't need modern medical diagnostics to tell what's wrong here. So this is an illustration of what this would look like. But Maui was an 18-year-old girl in France who had severe tuberculosis that caused lupus vulgaris of the face. Now, tuberculosis was very common back then in the 19th century and early 20th century. And the good thing with that is that I think it's like probably close to half or a good portion of Lourdes cases involve tuberculosis in some way because it was so common. And tuberculosis has also been a very visual disease. Like, it is respiratory, but it can spread to other parts of the body and cause these big sores. And so you don't have to have, x-rays to verify these. You can see if someone has huge sores on their face, it's pretty obvious to anyone. So the fact that this is a little bit older isn't a huge problem. She'd had it so much to where her nose and face were basically eaten away from ulcers. She had ulcers on her legs where she couldn't really walk for about 3.5 years. In July of 1892, her doctor, she told her she wanted to go to Lourdes, and her doctor wrote a report saying, "I really recommend that you don't because you're in bad health." And among his the medical ailments he lists, he mentions that she has tuberculosis in both her lungs, which caused her to cough up blood since 3 months prior to that, nightly fevers, and she had these huge lupus sores on her body, some of which were as big as a hand. So another physician who sees her as she's traveling on the train to Lourdes in August, so this is a month later, who sees her writes, "I was struck by her particularly revolting face. Both cheeks, the lower part of her nose, and the upper lip were covered in tuberculosis ulcer that secreted matter abundantly." So here's another eyewitness account from a doctor. The most interesting account, I think, is the next one, which is from Émile Zola. Now, Zola was a critic of Lourdes. He was actually a skeptic atheist. And while he was visiting Lourdes to write a novel, he sees her on the train with him. And he describes in his book, again, this is from an atheist who describes watching her. He says, from underneath the veil, because she was wearing, she would wear a veil because, you don't want to go out publicly looking like that. A hoarse voice growled. The head looked hideously like a monster with its hair and rough, staring eyes. The cartilage of the nose was almost eaten away. The mouth was drawn all up on one side from the swollen condition of the upper lip. The whole was a fright of fully distorted mass of matter and oozing blood. Not very peaceful.
Yeah, so I looked up this name as well and what was going on with all of this here, and I did find something in the National Institutes of Health. This is from July 27, 2012. It's the Lourdes Medical Cures Revisited. Did I go too far down? I think I did. And in the conclusions, it says here, after many mental twists and turns, we reached the same conclusions as Carroll some 80 to 100 years ago. Instead of being a simple place of miracles of interest only to the pious, Lourdes presents a considerable scientific interest, and although uncommon, the miraculous cures are evidence of somatic and mental processes we do not know. Upping the ante, we dare write that understanding these processes could bring about new and effective therapeutic methods. So it doesn't sound like they're saying, yeah, these were miracles. And that's just from the only thing I could find on this that had any level of credibility. So once again, we're seeing something that doesn't seem to have any credibility to it whatsoever, and that one would struggle to find much information on just from a simple Google search. Interesting for things that are supposedly documented miracles. You'd think that there would be a plethora of medical data and literature confirming these things, rather than not really finding anything at all.
PC and kind of, we would say it's probably insensitive by today's standards, but they were being very blunt. So yeah, this woman had very severe facial disfigurements that anyone could see with the naked eye. And so she goes to Lourdes with bandages on her face and a veil, praying. She, on August 20th, this is a few days later, she goes there and she bathes in the grotto, puts some water on her face, and she instantly feels more pain and she starts walking, which is the first time, she'd walked like unaided at least in at least 3 years, because she'd had huge ulcers on her legs that made it very painful. And so her bandages actually started to fall off because her face had gotten smaller and she couldn't even fit the back on. And so when they fell off, they saw that all her ulcers were closed. It was light pink skin, but all of the sores were gone. And this was like an instantaneous, healing. And so the doctors were amazed by this. And so she was immediately examined by the Lourdes Medical Bureau. And you can see a picture. This is from 7 years later. So this was at least lasting, several years later. She looks perfectly like a normal person back then. Yeah. So you have that. And we have many eyewitness accounts. If you go to the next slide, we have what her own doctor said. So the Lourdes doctors looked at her. She comes back 10 days later, and her primary physician writes, and this is on a medical certificate from August 30th of 1892. Saying,
again, if all of this had been documented by legitimate doctors who had like reasonable evidence for the things they were saying, these kinds of things would be able to be found on Google. They'd be documented. They'd be known about. Like, if there were ever an instance where something that was perceived to be a miracle had actually occurred and it had actually been legitimately documented, you wouldn't be coming up completely fucking empty with a Google search. I'm sorry, you just wouldn't.
saying, I saw the invalid Maui immediately on her return. I did not recognize her. So much was changed. I saw a graceful young girl coming towards me instead of a mass of humanity with a horrible and monstrous face, which I had seen 10 days previously. The tuberculosis has also disappeared. The cure has lasted. And on the right here, I have a picture from a contemporary newspaper back from 1894 called the Sacred Heart Review. And the title there is A Sensation in Paris, Proof of the Miraculous Cures of Lourdes. And this basically talks about how the doctor's certificate. So here's easily misdiagnosed, at least not the giant facial sores, and instantaneously simply said that this is something that we can't accept because people are hysterical. An instantaneous healing that got better, that lasted for several years. I think when she ended up dying, she ended up dying of natural causes, no relapses. That was witnessed by even skeptics. And Emile Zola did not deny that she got better. He actually wrote it, but he simply said that this is something that we can't accept because people are hysterical and the mind can do lots of crazy things. And so we can't accept this as a miracle. And so Zola did not deny that she was healed, but he kind of tried to hand wave this off. And Zola's a really interesting case because on the one hand, he writes that he says at one point, I want to go to Lourdes and I want to see, someone who doesn't have a finger, stick it in the water and come out with a finger. Like, I want to see a limb grown back. But elsewhere, he's written that he said, even if I saw everyone at Lourdes cured, I still wouldn't believe because this is ridiculous. We know it can't happen. So you do see some goalposts moving there. And so even when you have this witness, in fact, the funny thing with Zola is there were actually three certified miracles that happened while he was visiting. And there was this pretty big year gap. So like he happened to be there the weekend that there were like literally 3 cures in a row that he witnessed. And he accepted that they happened, but he still dismissed them and said, we can't call these miracles.
Yeah, but that's so valuable to have a skeptic there who's saying, I mean, I saw this stuff, but I don't know, man.
Good natural facial thing, right? Not like it's a specialty diagnosis. It's a quick,
from the dead.
And I have about 40 of these cases, as I said, like in the book around that. So I think having a cumulative case is a really good thing. So you can say maybe 1 or 2, like, well, maybe we can write that off. When you have a lot of really good ones, I think it's really a powerful argument when you look at it. This last one is, I think it's Dominguez Kinjam. That's how I'm presuming it's pronounced. And this is Resurrection from the Dead. So I had another resurrection one on Cam's channel. And I'm a little hesitant with these sometimes because there are cases where you can find, and Keener talks about these, where people's hearts will stop for like 40 minutes and people will pray for them and they'll start living again, right? And those are good, and sometimes it's impressive, but there is a phenomenon called the Lazarus effect where this can happen, and there's theories to how this can happen naturally. But I think we want someone who's like certifiably dead, like Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days. In the case I did with Cameron, it was someone who had been partially embalmed for like 3 days. right? So we're talking about ones not just someone stopped breathing, people thought they were dead and they came back. We're talking about ones where they're like certifiably, like obviously dead. So I think that's what we have kind of in this case. So if we'll go to the next slide here. This was a terrorist attack that happened on December 15th in 1999 at 9 p.m. at the Dulaus, I think, Theological Seminary in Jakarta, which is in Indonesia. So Dominguez had been a recent Christian convert and had been at the school. I forget, I think he was a student there. And so this was a big terrorist attack. And these are clips from the news footage of when this happened. So there was a Molotov cocktail thrown into it, burned. But this was by some Islamic extremists who were attacking the Christian church. And so they go out and they try to start attacking people. I think around 30 people or so were wounded. And Dominguez is brought out and they basically get a machete, a poisoned one, and start cutting at the back of his neck, trying to decapitate him, right? And so we have pictures here before we get to them. I will warn you, this is a slide where it gets a little bit graphic with the photos. These are from the original media report when the photos were taken, when the news was reporting on this attack. But Dominguez basically got almost completely decapitated. The front of his neck was still technically holding his head together, but the entire back of it,
you've given the warning. So I'm going to move on to the next slide if you're ready, but you've given the warning. So if you don't want to see this, don't keep watching.
Skip over it. Yeah. So these are some pictures of the body laying there. So you can't see as easily because it's on the back of his head, but clearly you can see the days and the blood there, right? With the body just being left. And you can see how thin he is already from that. And I believe this was after the body had already been moved. So the next one's even more explicit in terms of what you can see here. So you can see the big wound in the back of his neck, and I have a zoomed in version. And you can see where that arrow is pointing. You can see a little bit of the vertebrae. If you can see that, Braxton, that like black circle, like in his neck where the spine was severed, where they would have literally been cutting at the back of that. Yeah. You can see the vertebrae sticking out. So that's clearly a lot of blood loss there. And that's not something that's like, oh, maybe his heart stopped. Like that's pretty certifiably, if you're not going to survive that, right? That's a pretty bad injury. So he laid like this. They severed him and then they cover him in banana leaves and he lays like this for 5 hours. No one finds the body for 5 hours. About 2:30 a.m. in the morning, they find the body, the corpse. You can do the next slide. And they're dragging it out. So this is the picture of them when they find the body and they're starting to move it. And during this time, Dominguez claims that he had a near-death experience where he's seeing heaven and he, sees angels and Jesus and all that stuff. And then Jesus tells him to go back in his body. So he comes back, and as they're dragging him out, he very briefly squeaks out like I'm alive or whatever it is, like just a noise, which is hard to do because, he doesn't have much vocal cords left. So they're shocked by this and say, oh my gosh, so they put him there and they stitch his neck back together. Not because they expect to save him, but just so his head doesn't fall off at this point. And so then they take him to the Rama Sakit Haji Jakarta Hospital in the morning. This is December 16th now of 1999. You can do the next slide. So this is the pictures of when his neck was sewn back together. One on the right's when he was healed. And so they keep him there, but they don't actually give him treatments because they had, I think, 37 other patients they had to take care of. And he was basically considered hopeless. Like there's no way they can save him. They just wanted to keep it from falling off. So he doesn't get any blood transfusions. He's just kind of left there. No real treatments. And he's still somehow just there, not dying again doing that. So, and you have to take in mind, this is a third world hospital, right? With a big terrorist attack, they just don't have the resources to take care of everybody. They're just barely even getting blood as it is. So they don't want to waste it on him because he's a hopeless cause. So he lays there.
Not to interrupt you, Caleb, but like,
yeah,
some of this information, where are you getting this from? The news stories or what?
Yeah, news stories, and when he goes and gives this as his testimony as well. So this is one where I don't have all of the medical documentation, partially because it's in Indonesian and partially because it's a third world hospital and it's harder to keep records there. But there is lots of photographs from the news story and stuff, and mentions with the hospital and stuff like that. So that's where most of this is coming from. But yeah, he only weighed at this point about 48 to 50 pounds because he had lost so much fluid from the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid of his vertebrae, which had been severed. So all that's pouring out. And so the neurologist says that he's almost certainly not going to survive. And if he did, he's going to have brain damage and be a paraplegic because.
Yeah, I've been looking into this too. And again, like there's nothing from anything that isn't like a Christian website or something talking about how, he was raised from the dead from Jesus. Nothing to confirm it. And this is just really bad. I'm surprised that somebody would actually present something that this shady as like legitimate evidence for miracles. So yeah, and the fact that the guy's talking about how he had this near-death experience, just removes even more credit from that. So let's go to recap and resources and see what they say.
I like how you laid those out, and I like I think the woman at the beginning hit me the most, but with what we saw there at the end, a resurrection case is, of course, I would imagine for someone doing your kind of work, that's like the holy grail. You want to find the resurrection cases.
That and amputation, yeah.
Amputation, and really the
Amputee
amputation.
and resurrection.
You did an amputation one on Capturing Christianity.
Yep.
But with this one, if that really is that guy laying in the street and that really is his spinal cord, then what do you want? I mean, like, that's enough like a amputation type thing, I think.
Well, because now it'll be like, oh, okay, but why don't we have someone who's been cremated who's risen from the dead? Like, it'll get why don't we have someone who's a double amputee, right? Like, it'll be like we can move it back as far as you want to where it's like, okay, like how much will it go? But yeah, I think these are really interesting, and like I would say that I think that a lot of Christians might disagree on this. I think the evidence for like the historical resurrection of Jesus is good, but I think there is room to doubt just because it's so long ago. And I think that bolstering that with these kind of modern cases in a Christian context really does do a lot. Because if Jesus did not rise from the dead and Christianity is not true, I would expect prayer to the Christian God to do very little. But if Jesus was risen from the dead and is still appearing to people,
okay, I think that wraps this up. So this is the what is this? This is my fifth, I think, of Apologetics Analyzed. I got to be honest, this was probably the most boring and disappointing one I've done, just because I didn't really have much to talk about, because I couldn't look anything up on what was being said, because there was just no source material provided, nothing to corroborate it, which is just not what you would expect from something like a freaking medical miracle, even in a third world country. And so, I apologize for this one being a little bit shorter and boring, but it was, I gotta be honest, that was kind of bad. I mean, it wasn't kind of bad, it was bad. Like, this is your evidence of modern day miracles. Well, you might want to do a little bit better, because like, if people can't even like corroborate this and look this up in a simple Google search and at least confirm that, yes, this person is real, yes, this did actually happen to them, that's beyond just their testimony and a bunch of Christian sources taking it and running with it as if it's a miracle from God, then you might have something to present to people. You might have something that at least catches people's attention and makes them go, okay, that's a little interesting. But these 3 stories were just not at all even remotely interesting to me. They didn't seem to provide any sort of substantiation for miracles. There's no way, it seems, to really corroborate any aspect of these stories outside of what the people that these things happen to say. And with that, I'm gonna wrap this up. Not for the people on the playback, but for the people who are in the live chat at this given instant. Tomorrow, me and I believe it is Mark Reed will be doing a 2v2 flat Earth debate, and I think one of our partners is named Nathan, and I'm not sure if it's Nathan Thompson or not, because I think there's more than one Nathan that's a flat earther out there. But that will be tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Modern Day Debate for those who are interested. I figured I'd throw that out there. And with that, as always, my friends, through reason we progress. And until next time.